Hello and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. Today we are taking an exploration. We met with some wonderful people. The opening remarks today were about spiritual pride. And now we're going to take a journey with someone that I consider to be a papa, a godfather, if you will, of the understanding of the relationship of the church and Israel, the Jewish people. This was one of the very first books that I ever read when I received the call to begin to preach the gospel, how I could cross the bridge to become a kesher, if you will, a bridge to walk kind of in the footsteps of Paul as one to go equip the church to fulfill the Great Commission, which was to the Jew first. As Paul clearly stated, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God for salvation to all who believe," to the Jew first and then to the Greek. Not to the Jew better, but to the Jew first. And to understand that this inheritance, this engrafting, happened long before Peter and Cornelius. That the door, the gate was opened with one we know as Ruth the Moabitess. The very title of the book that I'm going to introduce you to is Your People Shall Be My People, taken right from straight from the book of Ruth. It is my extreme pleasure, personally and professionally, to welcome Don Finto to Revealing the Truth. Don, welcome so much to the program.
Thank you much. I'm delighted to be with you to do anything to pull together Jew and Gentile in our generation.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Don Finto pastored Belmont Church in Nashville for 25 years and founder and director of Caleb Company, a leading voice in Christian-Jewish relations. He's been actively involved with Jewish believers in both the United States and Israel. Don and his wife, Martha Ann, have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a growing number of great-grandchildren. Don, I believe you just celebrated your 85th birthday. 86th birthday.
87 in April, that's right.
87 in April, there you go. A man who has devoted his life to the Word and to bringing revelation, depth and understanding to the bottom line that if you are anti-Jewish, you are actually anti-Jesus. That yes. Anti-Jewish and anti-Israel is an anti-Semitic spirit. Doesn't matter what you think, what you say. You cannot divide the Jews from the land. You cannot divide the land from the Jews. You cannot deny, in the book of Hebrews, it says that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He was a Jew. He is a Jew, and he will return as the Jewish Messiah. And you cannot love the Jewish Messiah and hate his people. Don Finto, you have taken a book. It's been 15 years since Your People Shall Be My People. It was the day it came out, I think, the day it was released. Somehow or other I got my hands on a copy of it, and I read it just with a fever. 15 years ago, I was 6 or 7 years in the Lord. I was just beginning to drive in my own lane on the highway of heaven, and was no longer a wrecking ball of effervescence and unbridled zeal. I became focused in my witness, and this book came to me, and it became the first way I could ever understand the church mind. I knew the Jewish mind, that's all I've ever known, but I couldn't understand the church mind. I couldn't understand why they didn't know why the feasts were important, why Israel was important, and you helped me navigate from the other side. A book very much written thoughtfully to Christians to understand, but here I was a Jew, and you gave me the Paul Harvey, the rest of the story, if you will. So it's very exciting to represent this book, updated, expanded, Your People Shall Be My People, how Israel, the Jews, and the Christian church will. He doesn't say may, he doesn't say should. Don Finto says the Jews, the Christian church, will come together in the last days. And delighted that there's a forward by Michael W. Smith and his wife, fellow Nashvilleites with you, and wonderful people of God. Don, it's been 15 years since the first edition of Your People Shall Be My People back in 2001. What are the shifts we've seen regarding Israel and the Jewish people during the last 15 years?
Well, it's interesting. When that book first came out, I had been, back in the heyday, the hippie people had become Jesus freaks, and I was pastor at Belmont Church, and a lot of them were coming to my congregation, and that was one of the things that made me made me open to this whole thing, because some of them were saying, hold on a minute, are we grafted into you, or are you grafted into us? Why do I have to act like a, quote, Christian,
right,
when I can be a Jew who believes in their own Messiah, and by the way, you worship our Messiah as well? And during that whole time, because of the influx of people and everything, people were saying, well, Don, you ought to write a book. But I had no desire at all to write a book, because anything I would say somebody else had already said is good or better than I would say it. But then I began to see two things, Eric, that I didn't hear anybody saying. And that's why I wrote the book. Number one, I saw prophetically that it is time in this day for Jewish people to come to faith. I believe I can prove to people where you read the scripture and you see that this is the day when that's supposed to happen. And that's why we've seen so many Jewish people come to faith in this generation. They started in 1967 at the beginning of the charismatic Jesus movement people. That's interesting because of the whole thing with Israel in the 6-Day War. The second thing I saw that I didn't hear anybody saying was that the world revival that we're in China, Iran, Indonesia, Africa, all over the world, there is a major revival awakening going on, and that is totally connected to the return of the Jewish people to the land and to the Lord. And I didn't see anybody saying that. So I thought, well, I've got to write a book. And that's how the whole thing started 15 years ago. But I love the way Chosen has brought it out and increased with the addenda from different people.
It's fabulous. Names of people that I recognize and that I personally know. It gives a rich personal touch to it, and Chosen Books has done a fabulous job in really amplifying it and connecting with people like Abner Bosky and others in here who are the fruit of what you were talking about. Jewish believers now in the land, building congregations of both Jewish, Arab Christian, reaching Arab Muslims, dealing with Holocaust survivors, dealing with Ethiopian immigrants making Aliyah, and creating this perfect picture of what Judaism is. There is a Jewish community in Kaifeng, China. There is a Jewish community in Iran. There is a Jewish community in Ethiopia. We are of all colors. We are of all languages. We were cast to the four corners of the earth. So I would not look like if I went to a Japanese congregation, they might ask me if I was Jewish. And I would say, of course I'm Jewish. That's why I'm here on the holidays. They say, funny, you don't look Jewish. But there is no Jewish look. We were dispersed from Shem to the four corners of the earth. You clearly draw from the book of Ruth. Most people are unaware that today, if you convert to Judaism, the prayer that you say is actually the prayer from the book of Ruth, because this was the model of someone who was pitching their tent with the camp of Israel, choosing to worship the God of Israel, choosing to be one, echad, with the people of Israel, the children of God. And walk us through this, the inspiration, the book of Ruth, and how the church is to parallel that. But in this parallel, they seem to have created this their own highway to heaven. They've come off what Jeremiah says and what God says in Deuteronomy, that you are to walk along the way. When you come to the ancient path, you're to choose come to the crossroads, you choose the ancient path. Jesus said, I am Haderek, the way. And how did we lose our way?
The church didn't do the thing that Ruth did. When Ruth, who was a Gentile, married Boaz, she went and became Jewish in her expression, committed to the Jewish people. Of course, her grandson became the King David. I mean, so she totally took on Jewish ways. But what happened to the church was that the church threw out all the Jewish ways and kept their Gentile ways, and then began to impose their Gentile ways onto the Jewish people. And for 18 centuries, forbade Jewish people to celebrate their God in their own way, even though they believed in Jesus. And so both the synagogue and the church agreed that if you became a believer in Jesus, you were no longer Jewish.
Right.
And not until our generation has this changed. So there is a totally different thing happening about it. It's an interesting thing happened to me back in 2006. Oshrin Trader, whom you probably know,
Yes.
one of our major brothers in Jerusalem, and he was at an evening that we were having at the Belmont Church, and he happened to be there. Michael W. Smith and Marty Getz were there, and we were having an evening worship, but Usher happened to be in the area, and he came. When the whole evening was over, he came up and he told the story of Ruth and Boaz, and he said, "I'm a Boaz." And he called me up and said, "You're a Ruth. And let's cut covenant today between Jew and Gentile, the way Ruth and Boaz did." And the interesting thing is what he did was, so he took off his shoe.
Yes.
And he gave it to me, because in ancient times you would take your sandal off to give it.
Yes.
And so he handed me his shoe. And I accepted it, and I said, something very important is happening in the heavenlies in this November of 2006. There is something that is prophetically happening. Well, I went back and sat down, and I leaned, and Asher came over and sat down 2 or 3 seats over, and I leaned over to him and I said, "Asher, I can't give you this shoe back because it's a prophetic statement. I have to keep your shoe." He held up 2 brand new pair of Johnson Murphy shoes that had just been handed him by the fellow behind him. The fellow behind him is one of our friends who had bought these new shoes, his wife had, and he got in the car coming to the meeting, and he went back in the house to get these shoes, and he said to his wife, "For some reason I'm supposed to wear these shoes tonight." So he wore the shoes. He takes his shoes off when he worships the Lord. He put them up in front of him, which was under Asher's chair. So when Asher gave me the shoe, he gave him these Johnson Murphy shoes, and they are Asher's size. So there was a divine happening that came in the Ruth Boaz Jew Gentile thing on that November event, 2006.
You know how interesting it is in the story of Ruth. Here she was really looking for, Naomi was trying to find a kinsman redeemer, someone. And you see a particular order of things, that Boaz is not the one in line. He's not the first in line. Therefore, he must go through protocol. And had he not done things in God's order, had he taken upon himself to go out of order, we would be having this conversation today. Because God is not a respecter of persons, God's a respecter of his order. And because things were done in an orderly fashion, Boaz became the kinsman redeemer. This was the merger of the nation of Moab, born out of the incestuous relationship that Lot's daughters had with him. It was the restoration of a fallen nation, a bankrupt nation, a morally corrupt nation, merging itself to Israel to bring about the reconciliation of the world through the line of David.
Yeah.
And the backside of that is that when you look at the genealogy of Mary, and you look at the genealogy of Joseph, which is important because you have traditional Judaism says it has to be through the mother, biblical Judaism says it has to be through the father. They both converge at the exact same point, at David. And without Ruth, there is no David. And it's so significant that the merging of Jew and Gentile was not when Peter was given the dream of the food to eat and declared it unclean and was sent to Cornelius. That was a much later chapter in God's plan of reconciliation between Jew and Gentile, and brought about the statement of Ephesians 2, from the two he shall make one new man. And it is so eloquently told. You talk about
Let me share something with you
Yes.
that happened to me while I was getting a PhD at Vanderbilt. I taught at Lipscomb University here and got a PhD in German literature. And while I was there, all three of my children are adopted. They were adopted while we lived in Germany the first 8 years. My professor one day found out my children were adopted, and he said, "Well, Don, aren't you afraid they would have bad blood?" And I said, "Professor so-and-so, even Jesus had bad blood." And I thought it was so interesting that the women that are mentioned in the genealogy all have a rather unusual past.
Yes.
And how, as you just said, how Jew and Gentile merge in the lineage of Jesus, so that he himself represents both Jew and Gentile.
Yes.
So he's got both Jewish and Gentile blood in him.
You know, it's fascinating. I, too, am an adoptive parent. And I remember standing in the courtroom and at the adoption hearing in California as the judge rapped his gavel and he said, "I now declare that this child is yours and is entitled to every God-given right as if she was your natural born." And at that moment, I knew that her blood changed. I knew that her DNA was changed. And she now was my Jewish daughter. Because God is the one who is the God of adoption, the God of election, the God of engrafting. And when you're engrafted, you take on the nourishment from the roots. You don't take on the nourishment of the branch from the roots. And that's the perfect example through adoption and engrafting that we have. But there's also a counterfeit story out there in the world. And that counterfeit story is by the author of lies, the one who would plan the annihilation of the Jewish people. And there are, as we recount the 72nd anniversary of the Holocaust we did on Friday with the International Holocaust Remembrance, that there is a division, a schism in the church that believes that the church has replaced Israel because they view the covenant relationship with Abraham that they are so graciously and generously co-inheritors of as a conditional covenant, and they totally confuse the Genesis 15 covenant land with the passage of Deuteronomy, which talks about the enjoyment of the land. One is entitlement to the land, the other one is enjoyment of the land. We are still entitled based on this land covenant, which is what people say that they are co-heirs into the Abrahamic covenant. But the condition of the use was, the enjoyment of the use of the land was conditional upon our faithfulness, and we were not, and we were dispersed, but now we're being regathered. This replacement theology is not of God, yet it represents almost 50 to 70% of denominational Christianity. Mm-hmm. It's a scary thought.
I love those scriptures in Jeremiah and other places where God said, "As long as the sun is in the sky, Israel will remain a nation before me." And you're exactly right. I personally believe that the last great apostasy of the church, the last great division of the church, is going to be how we stand with Israel and the Jewish people. Because if we do not stand with Israel and the Jewish people, we will be deceived by the world media. And I could see how it could happen, that because already there are, as you say, many in the church who are swayed to take the side of the Palestinians in all of their intentionally killing innocent people, and then being the people who do it being celebrated. On the other hand, when an Israeli kills an innocent person, he could be court-martialed for it. And so there's that, but the church, much of the church is being swayed to be on the side of the Palestinians. And I could see in the future that it could happen, that somebody would say, well, you know what? the Palestinians do not even believe that Israel has a right to the land. There are I even have a letter from a pastor here in town who said that he believes that the present return of Israel to the land has nothing to do with biblical prophecy. Well, if you believe that, then I could see how you could believe politicians who would say, you know what, we need to resettle these Israelis. They're the real problem of world peace. Let's give them a land, like some of the people thought in the earlier days. Let's give them a place in Africa. Let's give them a place somewhere else. Let's resettle them so that we can have peace in the Middle East. And I could see how church people that are deceived would say, well, yeah, why not?
Right.
And somebody else might say, yeah, but some of them be killed in the... Well, that's just the price of world peace. Anyway, I believe the last great division is going to be how the church stands with Jewish people and Israel.
But as you and I both know that this is a prescription by God and His sovereignty. In Zechariah 12, He says, I will make Jerusalem a cup that sends the world reeling, and that when all the nations of the world turn against her, then I will raise her up. Then I will restore her to her former glory. So this meeting of the 70 nations, the 70 Gentile nations in Paris, really taking the stand against the 70 sons of Jacob. We saw that, and we saw it came to no avail because it was not in God's time. It was in man's time, but it was not yet time for the Lord to reveal His perfect plan.
Right.
Paul talked that the gift of salvation was given to the Gentile to provoke Israel to envy, and Don, it's been 50% fulfilled. They have been provoking Israel for 2,000 years.
Yes.
And now it's time for the envy.
I know, and praise God, it's happening.
It is happening. It
really
is happening.
People who so love Jewish people and Israel and so understand it. I mean, I've had it happen to me over and over again, and to the people I'm close with, where a Jewish person would say, I literally, almost these words, I'm jealous for the way you have such a personal relationship with God. We don't understand that. Jealousy is the word that I've heard over and over used when we genuinely have relationship with Jewish people that are not yet believers.
Right, not yet believers. We're talking with Don Finto on the updated and expanded and very personalized expansion by Chosen Books, who has taken the time to re-release Your People Shall Be My People for such a time as this. This is the time that the church needs to wake up. This is the time that the Gentile body needs to understand this statement from Ruth, this engrafting, that it is through this unity, that's through this love, that we are to provoke Israel to envy. I, as a Jewish believer, Don Finto, Dr. Don Finto, who pastored Belmont Church, who has had this heart for Israel, a burning desire to see God's people redeemed, God's people saved, and sees that the last great schism in the world is going to be this apostasy of replacement theology that's going to create a dividing line. But in the meantime, we are to win the hearts of our people. They are being gathered back in unbelief as God prescribed it. It is to be a secular nation until God's time is fulfilled. We read about that here in Your People Shall Be My People. We're talking with Don Finto. We're going to take a short break, but while we're on break, I want to encourage you as strongly as I possibly can. There are many great books to choose from on our website, many great authors, but this is one, that I personally know. I have sat with him at conferences over these last 21 years. He's been an inspiration in my life, and this book is something that is a must-have. Visit Books and Media page at ignitingnation.com. Order it right now as we break for a few announcements, and we'll be back with Don Finto in just a few minutes. Welcome back into Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We're in a deep discussion with Don Finto, author of Your People Shall Be My People, a book that came into my life right when it came out in 2001. It is a fabulous, fabulous book. Don, let me ask you, you say you wrote the book for two reasons. What were those specific reasons?
One was I saw on the basis of Isaiah 6, that's where I saw it, we can go into that, and Hosea 3, 4, and 5. Hosea 3, 4, and 5 says that in the latter days the Jewish people will come trembling to the Lord. Isaiah 6, Isaiah heard a voice in heaven, whom shall I send? He said, send me.
Yes.
I paraphrase by saying God told him to go tell Israel that her eyes were going to be closed, her heart was going to be hardened. Isaiah screams, how long? God tells him how long,
right?
Until the land is totally devastated, the houses are ruined, the houses are deserted, the fields are ruined. That happened for 18 centuries, but it's not any longer the case. So therefore, I believe that this is the sovereign time of God for Jewish eyes to be open. And one of the things we discussed in the break was, I want to know how you came to faith. So that was one of the things. The other was, and it's really fascinating because in the new copy of the book, there's an addenda by a pastor out in Texas, David McQueen, who's been one of my sons, as it were, who was totally shocked when he read Romans 11:12. He thought I had misquoted Paul, and because he had taught Romans so much, he had taught it in Greek, but he'd never really seen Romans 11:12, which says if their transgression, Jewish transgression,
Yes.
means riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their fullness bring? So I saw that the revival that's going on in China with over 100 million, there are all kinds of estimates, of believers in the last 50, 60 years was totally connected to the return of Israel, that the revival around the world. So two things I saw, and I thought, I've got to say this. It has to be out there. Jewish eyes open, that connects to the revival around the world. Both prophecy fulfilling in our day.
Right. And when you go further in Romans 11, I think it's verse 22, God says he'll continue his kindness to the Gentiles, provided they continue in their kindness to the Jews.
Yes.
We can't really say that we've got an 1800-year history of kindness to my people.
Right.
As I was growing up in a immigrant neighborhood, an immigrant family, Jesus was simply the God of the Gentiles. Kind of like when I drive by a Lutheran church, I would think it was Lex Luthor, Superman's archenemy, or the Episcopal Church was their Bible was the Canterbury Tales. I had no concept of church. Who was going to tell me about Jesus? Nobody would. I grew up in a Jewish home, went to a Jewish school, was in the synagogue with my grandparents from the old country. My grandfather came from Galicia, southern Poland, western Ukraine in 1904. Same time Fiddler on the Roof represents. That was his world. My great-grandfather was a Sephardic rabbi who answered an ad for a Sephardic rabbi. My grandfather was born in Eastern Europe. Why would he apply for a job as a Sephardic rabbi? Because he could get a sponsor to bring him to America. That's why. So when he got there, he was what he was. And they said, okay, well, you're here. We're not going to send you back, so you be the rabbi. So there you have it. That's the story of an Ashkenaz living a Sephardic rabbi's life as a founding member of founding rabbi of a congregation. My faith journey. I was raised in a conservative home. My father was completely secular. My mother's family was who I was really raised by from a religious perspective. I was bar mitzvahed. I was confirmed. I wanted to become a rabbi. My father said to me, what kind of job is that for a Jewish boy? And go out and make your name in the world. And so that's what I did. And in my 40s, I was a member of an Orthodox shul in Atlanta and would meet with the rabbi on a regular basis. And I would ask him, Rabbi, I've heard what the rabbis have said. I've studied Talmud. I've studied the Mishnah. I've studied Kabbalah, the Zohar. I've studied all this. But what does God have to say? And he said, why do you need to know what God has to say? You know what we say, and we are the arbiters, we are the harbingers, we are the ones that understand. And if you really want to understand, you pack your bags, you go to Jerusalem, join a yeshiva, and you'll find. And I said, but I've been studying Akiva, I've been studying Maimonides, I know what the rabbis have to say. I want to know what God has to say. And he said, you're not equipped, you're not capable. You don't possess what you need to know. And I stormed out of his office. And I was angry. And so I began a search. I was 40 years old. I began a pilgrimage. I embraced New Age. I had a friend who was a Buddhist. I looked at Near East, Far East. I looked all over. And I had a bunch of friends that were Christians. And they would say to me, come to church with us. And I go, no, I'm Jewish. And they would say, I'm sorry. And I'd say, you're sorry? What, you're sorry I'm Jewish? No, we're sorry. We don't want to offend you. Well, okay, then don't keep asking me to go to church. But they would persist, and they would persist. And finally one day they came to me and said, you know, we found something that's really Jewish. And I said, you what? And they said, yes, we found a place that's really Jewish. I said, what do you know about being Jewish? What do you know about reading a list of names of family members that did not live through the Holocaust? What do you know about having in your home the last one of one part of our family who all the families pitched together to bring her from a displaced persons camp? What do you know about living with all these languages, Hungarian, German, Polish, Ukrainian, Yiddish, all surrounding you, where it's just a cacophony of noises, and there's tradition, and they're all loud, and what do you know about being Jewish that you should say to me the place is really Jewish? So it provoked me. But it provoked me so much that they gave me the name of the place, and I said, you know what, leave me alone, I'll check it out for myself. How would you know Jewish if Jewish fell on you? So it bothered me. So I began calling over to this Messianic synagogue, and I would talk to a woman named Susan, and she was so kind, and she impressed upon me that, yes, we have a rabbi, yes, we have, it's a synagogue. Listen, she said, you'll understand everything we do here, everything we say here. You'll understand all of it. It will be natural to you. You'll feel like you've come home. So I told my friends, listen, I talked, and maybe I'll go over there. They said, listen, we'll take you. So we made plans for 2 weeks on a Friday night that they would take me. But I woke up on that Saturday morning 2 weeks prior and said, what do I need for the Goyim to take me, to show me something's Jewish? I'll get up and I'll go see for myself. So I walk in, and lo and behold, it's a synagogue, a big Star of David. A bald-headed man with a very large nose that greets me at the door and tells me his name's Mitch, and he takes me in and he says, would you like to talk to the rabbi? And I said, you talk to your rabbis here? Your rabbi's available. My rabbis growing up used to go through a hidden door in their library. They would pop out, speak, and they would go back in. Right? I only knew about the distance of a rabbi. I didn't know about the closest of a rabbi. But Rabbi Feldman and I were close, but we were close adversarially. We were spiritual adversaries, not as he was frustrated with me. So the rabbi took me into his office, and I'm thinking, when does services start? And he said 11 o'clock, and I said, but it's 10 after 11. He goes, no, don't worry. They can't do anything until I get there. So we talked for a while, and he took me in, and he sat me down in the second row on the end of the second pew, and he actually became my velvet Elvis. You know, the one that you walk in the room and the eyes, everywhere you go, it seems like Elvis is looking at you. You've seen those pictures. Well, that's what he was. And I thought he was just talking to me. And the sermon he was supposed to preach, he didn't preach. What he did instead was he preached a message on the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, HaPesach, the Passover, the Lamb of God on Mount Moriah, the Lamb of God who redeemed Israel from Pharaoh, and then Yochanan, the Levitical priest, okay, immersing as his father did in the line of Zechariah, who ministered in the second temple. This I could identify with. And then he said, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And I thought to myself, whoa, only one time in the calendar is sin taken away. That's the Day of Atonement. This is the only way sin can be taken away. It's a one-time annual event. The priest lays his hands on the goats. One becomes the scapegoat. One becomes the sacrifice goat. Take away is not to be taken lightly. Take away are two such significant words that most people don't hear them, but to me it pierced my heart. What do you mean take away? Cover, yes. Got it. Take away. And he saw the look on my face when he said the word take away. Somehow he knew that this was a stumbling block for me. This was a challenge to me. It wasn't that I didn't understand. I fully understood in my Jewish, to my kishkas, to my bowels, to the very core of me. Take away is not to be taken lightly. This is tantamount to saying that this is the final sacrifice. And he began to say, and when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, there was no place to bring a sacrifice. I'm thinking Tikkun Olam, prepare the way for the Messiah to come. I get that. But yet he gave me an explanation and he correlated it. And then he said, Jesus sat there at the Passover Seder, and he lifted a cup. He said, drink, this is the blood of the new covenant poured out for you. He took the bread and he broke it and he said, eat, this is my body broken for you. And I realized, Don Finto, the 12 Jewish men sitting in front of a Jewish rabbi would consider that to be the most blasphemous thing they could possibly do, completely against the Mosaic law. There was no New Testament at the time of Jesus. Therefore, he had to be revealing something to them that they understood so profoundly, so exquisitely, that they would partake and understand. That even Paul, Rabbi Shaul, would understand what the declaration was. And it goes to the number of fish Peter caught. The number of fish was 153. In Hebrew, that means ha-Pesach, the Passover. Jesus was not declaring that he was the Lamb of God. Jesus was declaring that he was that Lamb. That he was that Lamb who was wearing a crown of thorns caught in the thicket on Mount Moriah for the redemption of Abraham. That he was that Lamb whose blood was poured out on the doorpost of the house, that was placed on a wooden stake, who was consumed until there was nothing left. He was that Lamb that took away our sin. He was exactly what he says he was when he breathed his last three words, "It is finished," at the same time that the Paschal Lamb's throat was being slit and the priest was saying, "It is finished." And I said, "Yes," and amen, and my hand went up. And he connected all the Jewish dots, and he did not preach a word out of the New Testament, because I didn't need the New Testament to understand God's plan of salvation. Moses said, "One would come after me like me." You're to follow him and do what he says, or you'll be cut off from your people. So I understood the word "follow me" were so profound, because yes, Levi, Matthew heard those words and got up. Peter, yes, he knew those words. One that Moses, they were expecting, anticipating, looking out for the one to come fulfill that. And that's how I came to faith in Messiah.
Why, it's total fulfillment of Isaiah 6.
Total fulfillment of Isaiah 6.
The veil was removed from your eyes supernaturally, when all these things that were so contrary to everything that you believed. And now we have to pray that the veil will be removed from the church's eyes as well.
Yes.
But I tell you, there are a couple of, you were reminding me, I love the stories. I could talk all day about the supernatural way in which some of our friends have come to the Lord.
Yes,
like
in caves
yes.
in New Mexico.
Yeah, when he was on the mountains of New Mexico, and this Jesus freak started talking about Jesus, and he saw Jesus on the cross. But one of my favorite is, I don't know if you know the young man guy who is, he's probably 40-ish, maybe more, Guy Cohen up in Akko, who really came to faith through Eitan Shishkov, I suppose. But
yes.
Guy's granddad was the rabbi in Akko, and he was really rearing Guy to be a rabbi. He and Guy was going to the synagogue all the time, but some things happened in the synagogue. One of the things was, he went to the rabbi one day and asked him about the passage in Zechariah, where the king was coming in on a donkey. And the rabbi mixed up two Hebrew words and said, well, it doesn't necessarily mean donkey, it can mean material. It could be anything. It could be a coaster or a limousine. And Guy went away from there and thinking, yes, but it doesn't say that. It says donkey. Well, anyway, he was at the Palm Beach Hotel, and Talia, who is now his wife, a Russian Jewish believer, was there, and he was attracted to her, so they started seeing each other, and she started talking to him about Yeshua, and he said to her, don't ever say that name to me again. And so she thought, okay. So she didn't say the name, she just prayed. Well, one day, he was walking down the streets of Akko. He showed me the very spot where this happened. Somebody walked up to him and handed him a little brochure, and it was in Hebrew, living water, and he looked at it and said, no, thank you, and turned around to give it to the person who had given it to him, and there was nobody there. He ran every direction looking for who had given him this booklet, and was nobody. So he thought, this is really strange. So he opened it up, and he found that it was the book of the genealogy of Yeshua the Messiah, Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. And so he thinks, well, I'd be put out of the synagogue for just reading this, but I'm already out of the synagogue. So he starts reading it, and he's fascinated with Yeshua, with Jesus, and he comes to the place which I think is not one of the places that would attract me, where Jesus said, if your eye offends you, pluck it out.
Right.
to go to life with one than to hell with two, and so forth. And Guy says, this is my kind of rabbi. He's radical. So he keeps on going, and he gets to Matthew 21, where Jesus comes in on the back of the donkey, and he says, this is the guy I've been looking for. So he tells Talia that he'll go to the synagogue with her, to Tents of Mercy, Eitan Shishka.
Yes.
But he said, if there's a cross on the wall, I'm out of here.
Right.
And we understand that because the cross was a symbol of the Holocaust.
Yes.
And the figure of the cross. Now, we believe in the cross, but to the Jewish people, it can sometimes be. But anyway, there was no cross. But he looked up and he saw what was the ark. And he thought, they probably got a cross behind there. And then, of course, they open it up and start reading the Torah. That's how Guy. I love the stories of how God supernaturally is opening the eyes, even today. Yes. I won't go into it, but there's a recent young woman that I met who was reared in Mea Shearim. And she came to faith in a totally supernatural way, and now she wants to go to Iraq to work among the ISIS people. She wants, as a Jewish woman, single woman, she wants to go to her worst enemies and tell them about Yeshua.
Wow.
It's so fascinating what's happening in our day. We've got to keep our eyes open.
Well, we have a tendency to be the zealots of the day because we are impassioned people, believing firmly in what we hold on tightly. And
yes.
When we come to faith, we realize that if not me, then who?
Yeah.
You kind of come face to face with that. If I, as a Jew, am not walking in the footsteps of Paul in making sure that I reach across the aisle for the equipping of the church, and you say that division is the DNA of the church today. This is a direct quote from you, one that we will give an attribute on Twitter and all over, that Don Finto says that division is the DNA of the church. Help my people understand that.
Well, there's a whole chapter there on division, the DNA of the church, because when the church turned their back on the Jewish people,
yes,
they separated themselves. They began to say that God is finished with Israel, which came into the church in replacement theology. And when they did, there was what I call there was a mutation that came into our descendants. And from that time on, every new faith of any kind has established another denomination, so that there are thousands and thousands of denominations today. There are divisions across all kinds of lines. And it all started when we separated ourselves from our Jewish people. Praise God, it's happening. That faith is that Jewish and Gentiles are coming back together in Jewish believers and, quote, Christians, followers of Jesus, are coming back together in our generation as the one new man that Paul talks about in Ephesians.
Yes.
But the division really started between Jew and Gentile.
You know, we were supposed to be one. This engrafting, this understanding of our role on the tree, and Paul's so eloquent about it as he talks about the branches. I was a natural branch cut off for unbelief, laying in a heap, prepared for the fire. You were a wild branch. Until you came to faith, you were in your own fire, in your own pile, waiting to go to the fire. We both are grafted into the same tree. I have no status on the tree. We are both grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. Break it down to two words: commonwealth. The commonwealth of Israel is the land, is the richness of the Genesis 15 borders, of the mandate for us to live, your people shall be my people, as Ruth did, to live together in a Jewish context, serving a Jewish Messiah, reading the foundational scriptures of the Tanakh, so that the parables of Jesus would not become mysterious, but they would become obvious. He says, I only say what I heard my Father say. I only do what I saw my Father do. When did he hear that? When did he see that? He saw that as recorded in the Tanakh. This is the record of what his Father said and what his Father did.
Now you can understand, Eric, why we have all of our students at Caleb Company Training School memorize Romans 11.
Yes.
That is one of the requirements of our students. We memorize it. You can understand that. I mean, is God finished with Israel? Not at all.
Not at all.
Have they stumbled so as to fall beyond recovery? No, they haven't. But, and the whole thing, if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? And I love the 30th verse where Paul says, just as you, talking to Gentiles, were at times disobedient to God, and now have received mercy, so they too now have become disobedient in order that they too may receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. So the whole idea, the whole thrust, the whole desire of God is that the church show mercy to Israel.
Yes.
And then make them jealous. But we've done, as you already said, we did the very opposite. We've castigated them, we've exiled them, we've confiscated their wealth, we've killed them, we've put them in gas chambers. And it was a church, it was a Christian nation. Spain, Great Britain that exiled them, the Nazi Holocaust. It was all Christian nations that did this. They weren't Christians, I don't believe, but it was they that have done this horror against the Jewish people. But praise be to God, it's happening different with people like you and me in our day, that we're coming together in heart.
Well, I'm so incredibly excited about the the resurrected life that I live, the resurrected life that you live, and the resurrected life of your people shall be my people. Now, Israel, the Jews, and the Christian church will come together in the last days by Don Finto, forward by Debbie and Michael W. Smith, with glowing praise from Sid Roth, James Gall, Cindy Jacobs, Francis Frangipane, Eitan Shevchkov, contributions from Asher and Trader, from Avner Boski, from so many of the people that we support all over the land. And so we're just delighted to present to you this fabulous work, a foundational work. If you like my teaching, then look at the teacher. I aspire to only be as good as my teacher, and I thank Don Finto for the words that he's sown into my life, for the teachings that I've sat under at conferences and at meetings with him. And Don Finto, it has just been a delight and a pleasure to be a part of an introduction of a book that's been so important to me. And as I build a bridge, I never could understand the other side of the equation. I was not, quote unquote, out of the church world. So I didn't have the Greek mind the church understand. And this helped me navigate the same way it's to equip the church to navigate my waters and the waters of our Messiah. And so this is not an us and them, it is a we together. This is a book about unity. God says, Hine matov umanayim shebachemim gam yachad. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity. Yachad. This is the unity of the brethren. This was the unity of the brethren in Acts chapter 2. They had everything in common. They served each other. They lacked for nothing. This was the miracle of Acts chapter 2. Yes, there was smoke. Yes, there were tongues of fire. Yes, there was speaking in tongues. But the lasting, enduring message was unity. It was for us to come together and let Messiah be the glue that binds us together. If he is not enough, then what is?
Amen.
If the blood on the cross that was shed is not enough to bind us together, then what is? I encourage, excuse me, I encourage you to get Your People Shall Be My People, Don Finto. Visit ignitinganation.com. Support this great work of Don Finto. A friend of this program, a friend of mine. Thank you, Chosen Books, for sharing them with us. We appreciate you so very much. May the Lord bless all the works of your hand. We're going to take a break, and we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth after these announcements.